Hello and welcome to the ChinnyVision Podcast, the very irregular, how long's it been since April? Anyway, it's the very irregular podcast with me, Chinny Hill, talking to various people in the retro community. Thanks for tuning in. And today I'm very excited to have the world famous biscuitologist and owner of the One Credit Champ YouTube channel with me. It's Mentski. Hi, Mentski.
Hello. How's it going?
And thanks for joining me here. And well, tell us a little bit about yourself and One Credit Champ.
Many moons ago, I felt the insatiable need to document my arcade history. It originally started off as a little trip through my history of playing arcade games in an old chip shop down the road from me. And it was called Games from the Chippy. But eventually, I decided to spread out into other arcade games that I played and arcade games that I never did. But the whole idea was make it short and sweet, only play the games for one credit, see how far I get while I talk about them.
So where did your computing journey start?
It's all intrinsically linked to the arcades. Early 1980s, with the ladies of my family, I used to go to the local football club bar to watch them play Ladies Skittles every Thursday night. And in the corner of that room, there was a black cabinet that would have a rotating choice of games on it. Some of the games that I can remember on it are things like Rally X, Scramble, definitely Scramble. Scramble is a game that I can actually smell. Scramble, to me, will always smell of Real Ale and stale crisps. That's where it really started, because playing these games, obviously, I wanted something for the home. I mean, first I had little handheld things, like little Coleco handheld things and stuff like that, but that wasn't going to keep my interest for too long. So eventually, in Christmas 1981, I think it was, I had an Atari VCS. Before it was ever called the 2600, the Atari VCS, as distributed in the UK by Ingersoll, so much so that they tried to take all the credit for it. It was a light sixer. The start of my journey, before I ever really had any kind of computers, was consoles and was the Atari.
And the games you had with your Atari?
Obviously Combat. Combat came with the machine. Oh, what else? I had Yars' Revenge. I had Galaxians, because to be quite honest, Space Invaders on the 2600, not that great. Galaxians is pretty damn fantastic. Adventure. Never had E.T. Managed to avoid that mess. I also had some games by, some of those third-party games, which there was Riddle of the Sphinx and Atlantis. I think those were both by Magic. I can't remember having too many games for the 2600 over the time that I had it, to be quite honest. Those are the ones that kind of come out to me. I remember that I wanted Pac-Man, but my mum said that I could never have it because it cost 30 quid at the time.
Which, a lot of money.
Let's face it, is a lot of money in 1982 bucks, yeah.
As a VCS owner, were you conscious of the American games crash and the releases becoming kind of less, so to speak?
Not so much less, but a hell of a lot cheaper. All of a sudden there was a certain kind of bargain bin to the games. For example, the Riddle of the Sphinx and Atlantis, I remember getting those in a 2-pack for my birthday. At that point in time, they were just games that they were just trying to get rid of.
Do the American cartridges work in the PAL systems, or do you have to have an NTSC cartridge in America?
No, you have to have PAL versions of the games. I remember that much because they all have PAL on the label of the cartridges. You can actually play NTSC games in a PAL system, but the video output chip in the PAL system, because of the way the PAL color burst and everything in the signal works and everything, the color palette is completely different on PAL systems, and in fact it has less colors, so they had to reprogram all the NTSC games so that they work on a PAL system with the PAL color palette. But if you had a C-cam, it's cut down to about 16 colors. be glad you never lived in France.
So, how long did you have the 2600 for?
I think it was until about 1985. Well, I had it well after that, but that was when I got my next system. I was hanging around with a friend of mine from school called Stephen, and he had a Rebke Sinclair Spectrum, middle of 1985, and he introduced me to the wonders of Sabre Wolf and Jet Set Willy, and I instantly realised I needed some of that in my life. So come Christmas 1985, before that, I was actually buying games for the Spectrum, like weekly. I'd have my pocket money, I'd go up to Boots, I'd buy one of the games from the Mastertronic 199 collection, every so often a Firebird game. So for months leading up to this, I mean, from probably about September to December, every week I was buying a new Mastertronic game so that I would have a substantial amount of games to play when the Spectrum came, because I knew it was coming. I knew I was getting this. I ended up having a Spectrum Plus in 1985, Christmas 1985, the year that Sinclair were trying to get rid of all their Spectrum Pluses because they had too many in stock. The month afterwards, January 1986, was the month that the 128K Toast Rack was released. They decided not to release it at Christmas because they had too many Spectrum Pluses. So I missed out on a 128K because I wanted a Spectrum for that Christmas.
That was...
Oh, dear.
That was Dixon's and them getting a load of cheap 48K pluses, wasn't it? Because that was the old story of Dixon's ringing around everyone, including Amstrad, going, "Hey, Alan, you got any cheap Amstrads you want to sell us?" And Alan going, "No, we've sold them all, thanks." But, of course, Acorn and Sinclair had loads of machines around, so they got done over by Dixon's.
Yeah. I remember getting this set from Curry's. So it was the Spectrum Plus. It came with a tape deck with a bunch of Sinclair software pack-ins like MakerChip and Taskword. I think it cost roughly about £149.
And that price differential with the software, you're talking about the Mastertronic and Firebird labels, and that difference between that and coming across from the VCS, where games could be, as you say, £30 for Pac-Man.
Yeah. Let's face it, that's the reason gaming in the UK survived where it didn't in America, I think, really, where we had this budget label availability and the fact that everything came on tape and it was all low cost for them to produce, low cost for us to buy. That is, pretty much the reason we survived while the US didn't for quite a while. That and the move to computers rather than consoles, because there was that whole educational drive and everything, wasn't there? Computer in every home and all that guff.
It's a very different...
Sadly, not everybody ended up getting a BBC, but...
It's a very different mentality, because in the USA it's more of an entertainment device, whereas in the UK there was this big thing of, this is a computer, it can do all these different things for you.
Oh, yeah, because when people ask their parents, "Oh, I want a computer for Christmas, I want a computer for my birthday," etc., etc., the excuse to get it was, "Oh, it'll help me with my schoolwork. I'll be able to do this. I'll be able to do that." That was always the excuse. It'll help me with my schoolwork. I can't remember ever using my Spectrum for schoolwork.
As an arcade fan, obviously you're looking at the arcade conversions for your Spectrum. So what are you buying?
Of course, yeah. I think my first arcade conversion might have been Space Harrier. Might have been. I was obsessed with Space Harrier.
Oh, yeah.
Obsessed with the arcade game. So when I found out that was coming out on the Spectrum, I was looking forward to that for probably months. Would it be arcade perfect? The words arcade perfect rattle around the school halls, rattle around my brain. Always that thing. How close to the arcade game would these games be? And we'd use it a lot, even when we were playing on Spectrum. Oh, this game's arcade perfect. Of course it isn't.
Space Harrier, the hydraulic cabinet with the dual 68,000 processor, all the scaling and everything. I saw that, as I often say, down at Clarence Pier Arcade in Southsea, then getting it for my birthday, playing it before school and it all being vector-based on the CPC and kind of going, well, actually, the level 1, they've got all the baddies in the right positions. Beyond that, it becomes looser.
Yes.
I think it's the same on the Spectrum as well. So at least you're feeling
It is. All of the enemy patterns are exactly the same. Yeah.
We talk about Arcade Perfect. It was a representation of the arcade in your home, an approximation, if you like.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was a big Sega fan the second I saw a Sega game in the arcades, and I can't remember which one was the first one that I saw. It might have been Hang On, it might have been Space Harrier. There's probably even games before that that I would have seen. Lots of places that I would see arcade machines, and then kind of make a mental note that if I ever saw them for the Spectrum, that I'd buy them on the spot.
When you're buying your computer games, your arcade conversions, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, were there labels you were looking out for, publishers that you were looking out for that did a better job than, say, other publishers?
I don't know back in the Spectrum era so much. It feels funny to say now, but Elite didn't do a bad job at one point in time. Yeah, Space Harrier wasn't too bad. Their conversion of Bomb Jack wasn't bad. Their conversion of Commando wasn't bad. So pretty much a lot of the arcade Ghosts and Goblins as well. Their conversions weren't bad, at least on the Spectrum. I mean, Ocean as well. Ocean would use the Imagine label for a lot of arcade conversions in the early years. I mean, I don't think I really kind of looked at one label, because I mean it was that case of Imagine, US Gold would be the ones really pumping them out. What you got was pretty much what you got, because in the end of the day, especially US Gold, I mean, plenty of games I wanted, US Gold had the rights to. Sadly, they would often get the cheapest people to program them and give them the least money and the least amount of time to develop them, and we got what we got. Often Tiertex, obviously, sometimes Probe. Probe are usually a bit better, but there are certain points in time where Probe missed the mark.
I think I listened to an interview with someone from Probe, and I think in later years they were basically developing almost like one game and were just kind of porting it from their development system very quickly onto all these different systems, so they become almost like cookie cutter.
Yeah. In factory line development. It does lead me to the biggest disappointment that I had during the Spectrum era. Christmas 1987, after about a year of me playing Outrun in the arcades, every opportunity that I ever had, US Gold was starting to do the big marketing push. Leading up to Christmas in 1987, Outrun was coming out on all the home computer formats, and I'd seen all the screenshots, particularly one screenshot that was spread throughout the Spectrum magazines, made the game look like fantastic, nice clear road, huge sprite of a truck with the car overtaking it, and it looked pretty close to the original arcade game, outside of the fact that it was all mono and the bottom of the screen was green and the top of the screen was blue, and we all thought it was going to be fantastic. And then the game turned up. First things first, the copy that I got was mastered incorrectly. So the level tape was all recorded backwards. And I mean the actual sound, the waveform was backwards. So you couldn't load any levels in. So for the first 2 days, maybe, I just load up the main part of the game, and there was a beeper version of Magical Sound Shower that would play, and I just listened to that, and I was wondering, I wonder how this game's going to be. I went back to Boots a couple of days later, so they got a new batch of the game in, came home, slammed it in, and I was quite disappointed by Outrun. Straight from the start, I was quite disappointed by Outrun. They tried to do too much with that game. You could tell. They tried to make it look as close to the arcade game as possible. They tried to give it all of the features of the arcade game, like the undulating hills and all of that. Let's face it, the Spectrum couldn't cope with that. It couldn't. It couldn't cope with that at that scale. And because of that, it's slow. It's kind of messy to look at, especially on a CRT. I was very disappointed with that. The same people who programmed that for Probe were the people who programmed Enduro Racer earlier that year. And Enduro Racer is fantastic on the Spectrum. Absolutely great. So, yeah, it did not do well. Outrun did not do well. And it was only about a year afterwards when we saw Chase HQ that I think an awful lot of us realised how bad Outrun really, really was. And if they just dialed it down just a little bit more, just made the sprites a little bit smaller, just done a little bit of this, just like how Chase HQ did it. I mean, Chase HQ didn't go for the big sprites. They didn't try to make it look exactly like the arcade machine. And because of that, it played and felt more like the arcade machine. Just didn't work. Thus began my quest to get the arcade perfect Outrun in the home, because that game I was completely obsessed by. Absolutely 100%, 1000% obsessed by.
It was a similar situation on the CPC because I had Outrun and I got it the same day as Space Harrier. It was slow. It looked colourful. The screenshots on the back of the box looked great, but it was just too slow. And I've often wondered if there was a bit of a development crunch up to Christmas because US Gold absolutely had to get this out no matter what.
That had to be at Christmas. Yeah, no doubt about it. It's the first time that I can ever remember seeing a bull shot in a magazine. It was a mock-up. The graphics that we saw, it was the same graphic for the car, but the trucks, the gigantic trucks and everything that were in that screenshot were nowhere to be seen in the finished game, because they wouldn't be able to be, because the Spectrum just wasn't capable of that. Those trucks ended up being about the same size as your car in the finished game. And the rational mind afterwards, when you're a little bit older, you there kind of going, yeah, I can understand why that never happened now. But how old was I then? Probably about 12 years old. Seeing what I saw in a magazine and then seeing what I saw on the screen, I wasn't ready for that level of deception. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I was really upset by that. And as I said, it made me strive to find the perfect version of Outrun.
It's a common shared experience, Outrun, because so many people purchased it. And of course, this was an experience on a smaller scale with other games as well, where you've been lied to. Nemesis on the Spectrum with the mocked-up shots in Sinclair User, for example.
Yes, I remember that as well, yeah.
But so how long did you carry on with the Specky?
I want to say about 4 months after the Outrun incident, April 1988, I decided to take all of my life savings. I decided that this wasn't a thing that I was going to ask for a Christmas present because it was a bit too expensive at that point in time, but I was going to go 16-bit. I was in secondary school at the time. At this point in time, I was there thinking it would be really nice if I had a powerful computer for school, because at this point in time, I did kind of want a computer for school things as well. So in 1988, I got the ST Explorer pack with Rana Rama and Neochrome. I went to Evesham Micros. Evesham Micros had a little shop in Evesham, and they just have a couple of tables with rows of different computers and everything. And I remember going in there personally, because we were so close by, I didn't need to do mail order for this type of thing. A few of my friends at school had got an ST by then. So basically, my choice of getting an ST was based on the fact that all of my friends had STs and I could copy the games, obviously. I mean, whatever reason would there be? One of the things that Isha Micros also introduced me to, due to their pack-ins, was the concept of public domain. I think there was 10 PD discs they'd pack in with the ST Explorer pack, because the actual ST pack in itself consisted of one disc, I think, and all it had on it was Rana Rama. So, I mean, the pack from Isha Micros, you'd end up getting all sorts of public domain stuff. So you get Neochrome, the old art program. There was a copy of the big demo, but that continued on because I ended up getting an extensive public domain demo collection. I became quite interested in the demo scene during my ST years.
And public domain makes the ST more affordable because your games are 20 quid a go rather than $1.99. So what, how were you kind of bouncing that out with your £20 a time games versus your PD stuff versus, I'm going to say it, copied games, pirated games, as you will.
Public domain for me was the demo scene, pretty much. I mean, every so often you'd get a game by a demo scener. Demo scener games were usually all flash and no substance. There was always something lacking in the design department of demo scener games. They'd always look nice. They'd always have perfectly smooth scrolling. You know what I mean? Like stuff that the ST never usually quite did as well as the Amiga, and there it was in demo scener games, but the games weren't good. They were rarely that good. I had a lot of full price purchase games. I definitely did. However, one of my friends had a modem, and every so often a few of these interesting discs would come my way, and more and more as the time went on, as they were all distributed among friends and people, and the networks expanded. So the Automation discs, the Medway Boys discs, the Pompey Pirates discs, they became the staple for the ST owner. A lot of retail ST games were made to work on the earliest model of Atari ST. The earliest model of Atari ST had a single-sided disk drive in it, which meant that for the people who had double-sided disk drives, which was about 80-90% of ST owners by that time, they were wasting half of the disk. So the crackers, they'd compress the games and they put far more than 2 on one disk. So the whole idea of having a collection of these cracked games with demo scene like intros, so it appealed to me in more than one way. It wasn't just the games, it was the intros, it was the music. There was quite a crossover between those two different scenes. I had a lot of those games. I had an awful lot of those.
I've always wondered how prevalent they were, because I knew ST owners where I was, and I didn't know anybody with Automation or Pompey Pirates or Medway Boys games, and yet when I speak to ST owners today, they seem to be quite a common thing.
I'd get them through all sorts of different people as well. Although, as I said, I had the one friend that was on the bulletin boards, and he managed to get them from somehow, somewhere. I don't know if he was getting them through the post or if he was downloading them overnight on his phone. I have no idea. And as I got interested in the public domain side of things and everything, I ended up getting contacts in public domain libraries, which meant that I ended up getting my own contacts of people that had these discs. So by the end, even I was bringing games into the local network, as it were. Yeah.
Whereabouts were you buying your games?
Well, early on, the only places that you could get the games where I used to live were Boots, WH Smith's. It wasn't until much later in kind of the 16-bit era where we started getting specialist shops. where I live, and there were a couple that turned up. There was one down the lower end of town called GD Software that was, quite small little shop. The 8-bit games were all in those kind of tiny cardboard boxes. They'd moved on from the tape boxes or the double tape boxes at that point in time, and they were in those little cardboard boxes, whilst the 16-bit games were obviously in the bigger ones. So we were getting to that point in time, and they'd also, eventually kind of branch out into, console games, Mega Drive, Game Boy, and all that kind of stuff. The other shop was at the other side of town, and it was in the basement of a PD company. And underneath was this little shop where a small man in a big suit called Andy used to sell me games. I'm pretty sure you know who I mean.
You're going to have to help me.
The first guest of your podcast.
Oh!
The first guest of your podcast.
Right. Yes, I'm a bit COVID-riddled at the moment, so apologies for not picking up on that.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah.
Listener,
Yeah.
I do have COVID. I tested positive for COVID this afternoon, and I am a bit kind of...
And Bodie.
Yes, of course, we spoke to Beldy back in episode 1 about him working in the computer shop. Can't remember if he mentioned you or not.
Yes, yeah. And we bonded over our love of the Atari ST, and would often swap demo scene stuff and probably the odd non-demo scene disc. So, we have a certain amount of crossover there.
And did you hang on to the ST into the 90s?
I did, but it wasn't the only machine I had, even at that point. Within the same year, because I was still striving for that arcade perfect version of Outrun, and let's face it, the ST didn't have it, my next choice was go with the company that made the game. So, December 1988, I got a Master System. Up until that point, best version of Outrun. It was cut down, but it was everything that you needed in an Outrun was there. And it ran at a decent rate. And it had the music. Yeah, for me, that was the best version of Outrun that I'd had up to that point, almost certainly. I had a Master System very early on. Even at that point, the magazines had told me that the Master System was not going to be for long. Because obviously, by that point in time, another Sega console had already released in Japan and was on the horizon.
So when did you get your Mega Drive then?
Interesting question. Yeah, I think it would have been 1989 or 90, whenever Strider came out. It was Strider, for me, that made me really want a Mega Drive. One of these cases, arcade conversions. Get the Strider conversion, buy Tiertex from US Gold on the ST. God, is that not good? Half the bloody screen taken up by a huge status bar. Like, just jerky scrolling. And then you saw the Mega Drive version, you went, oh my God, that is, for the most part, and as close as I've ever used these words to that point in time, arcade perfect. There were a few games by Ocean on the ST that were getting there, mainly the Taito ones, because they were providing them with all the documentation and the graphics to actually be able to make the games in the first place, because an awful lot of those arcade games, they were given nothing and all they had was an arcade board and they had to eyeball it. But Strider on the Mega Drive, that you couldn't get closer.
And I guess if you are going down this arcade perfect route, then Sega is the console route you would have gone down, as opposed to Nintendo or someone else. Isn't anyone else, really?
Well, Nintendo really didn't have the foothold in this country that Sega had anyway. Sega already had a good name for themselves before the consoles really were a thing. Because we had this home computer arcade conversion thing going on in our games industry, and because it was so prevalent, Sega's name was already in everybody's heads. Everybody knew what Space Harrier, Outrun, Hang On, Afterburner, everybody knew those games. people knew who Nintendo were. Yeah, sure. But I think that word association-wise, if you said Nintendo to an awful lot of people at a certain point in the 1980s, they wouldn't have even gone to that. They would have gone, oh, yeah, those people that made Game & Watches. Oh, yeah, they make a console now. You know what I mean? Who was Sega? Oh, yeah, they made Outrun. They made Afterburner. They made this. They made that. I honestly think that was one of the reasons why Sega got such a good foothold in the UK. And also, it probably was an advantage to have a company like Mastertronic distributing their hardware, because obviously they had all of the experience and all of the networking available to kind of get them into the right places. Not the time that they wanted to, but the year afterwards at least.
And as the years move on, you've got your ST. Do you move on to another machine from your ST?
Funnily enough, no. Not for a long, long while. The ST was the computer I had for many, many years afterwards. And through the 1990s, I didn't even particularly do much computing things. I was a bit of a school dropout, you see, for a while. I had every opportunity of going to college to do a computing course, BTEC or something like that. And I just looked at it all and went, I know all this. Until kind of like the mid-1990s. And by that point in time, I was there looking longingly at getting a PC, and when I went to university, I finally did with my loans. And
everything becomes rather boring at that point in terms of everyone has a PC. But yes. Do you still have any of these machines?
I still have the Spectrum somewhere, along with its burnt out keyboard membrane. I still have the ST, but it's in bits. The Master System got sold. The 2600's still about somewhere. I have all the retro games machines, pride of place in my TV center. I still have a Mega Drive with a Mega CD and 32X tax, a Japanese Saturn and a Japanese Dreamcast. So, the Sega Holy Trinity. But outside of that, no, not really. I mean, a lot of stuff I'll emulate nowadays if I really need to.
Mentski, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Whereabouts can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter, twitter.com/Mentski, and on youtube.com/Mentski, where I will one day, when I've stopped doing secret projects that I can't mention, I will come back to YouTube, maybe.
Thank you so much. Cheers.